The accusations hit me like a slap across the face as the dirt was still being shoveled onto Richard's coffin. You never loved him, Beckett. You were just after his money, you gold-digging opportunist, his sister screamed, her voice echoing through the gathered crowd at the upscale cemetery in upstate New York. I stood there frozen in my black suit, the weight of their stares crushing me. But what they didn't know was that my heart had never truly belonged to Richard. It had always been with Elias, the man whose shadow I could feel lingering at the edge of the mourners even now. The sun beat down unusually bright for a March afternoon, turning the grass almost golden and making the whole scene feel like some twisted movie set instead of the end of a 12-year marriage. Richard had been 58 when the heart attack took him on a Tuesday morning while I was making coffee in our Manhattan penthouse. Everyone assumed I was the young husband who had hit the jackpot at 28. They didn't see the nights I sat by his hospital bed after his first scare, or the way I had quietly given up my dreams of opening a small gallery in Brooklyn because his health came first. His family had never liked me. Richard's sister, Margaret, and his brother, Thomas, had whispered about prenups and gold diggers from the day we said, "I do," in a quiet courthouse ceremony 5 years earlier. They thought I was some starving artist he had picked up at a gallery opening. What they didn't know was that I had met Elias first, back at NYU when we were both 19 and the city felt like it belonged to us. We had fallen hard and fast in that cramped dorm room on the 10th floor of Weinstein Hall, sharing secrets and kisses under the glow of string lights we had strung across the ceiling. But Elias came from old money in Connecticut, and his parents made it clear that their only son was expected to marry well, carry on the family law firm, and keep the bloodline pure. My own parents back in Ohio had only just come around to the idea that their son was gay after years of awkward church sermons and silent dinners. They wanted stability for me, not some risky romance with a guy whose family could ruin us both with one phone call. So when Richard, a respected hedge fund partner who had lost his previous partner to cancer, offered me a life without the constant fear of being disowned or fired from the part-time jobs I was juggling, I said yes. It wasn't about the money. It was about breathing. Elias and I had promised each other we would stay friends, that the love would fade. It never did. We stole moments over the years, quiet lunches in hidden cafes in the West Village, late-night walks along the Hudson when Richard was traveling for work, a single weekend in a cabin upstate that we swore would be the last. Every time I told myself it was over, Elias would look at me with those green eyes, and I would fall all over again. Now, standing at the graveside, I could feel him watching me. He had come alone, dressed in a simple charcoal suit, his face half hidden by the brim of his hat. We hadn't spoken in 6 months, not since Richard's diagnosis had turned terminal and I had chosen to stay by my husband's side full-time. The guilt had eaten me alive, but so had the love. Margaret's voice cut through my thoughts again. You think we don't know about the will? Everything goes to you. The apartment, the accounts, the house in the Hamptons. My brother worked his whole life for that, and you swooped in like a vulture. The crowd murmured in agreement. Richard's colleagues from the firm shifted uncomfortably in their designer shoes. Even my own best friend, Lena, who had known about Elias since college, looked away when our eyes met. She had warned me years ago that secrets this big always explode. I wanted to shout the truth, but the words stuck in my throat like shards of glass. How do you explain 12 years of loyalty mixed with a love you never stopped feeling for someone else? How do you tell people that the man they thought was your savior was also the cage you had willingly stepped into? The priest finished the final prayer, and people began to disperse toward the waiting black cars. Margaret stormed over, her heels sinking into the soft grass. This isn't over, Beckett. We'll contest every penny. You won't get away with this. I didn't answer. I just watched Elias from the corner of my eye as he stepped forward, slow and deliberate, like he had been waiting for this exact moment his entire life. The wind picked up, carrying the scent of fresh earth and expensive cologne, and for the first time all day, I felt something other than numb. I felt seen. Elias stopped a few feet away, close enough that I could see the faint scar above his left eyebrow from the night we had snuck into a rooftop party and fallen over a railing laughing. He didn't speak at first. He just looked at me the way he always had, like the rest of the world was background noise. Beckett, he said finally, his voice low and steady in that Connecticut accent that still made my chest tighten. I'm sorry I couldn't get here sooner. Traffic on the bridge was brutal. Margaret spun around, her face twisted in confusion and rage. Who the hell are you? This is a private family matter. Elias didn't flinch. He reached into the inside pocket of his suit jacket and pulled out a thick envelope sealed with red wax. The crowd that had started to leave paused, sensing something bigger than another family argument. I recognized the seal immediately, Richard's personal notary stamp. My hands started to shake. Actually, Elias said, turning to address everyone, I'm here as Richard's attorney of record for the final reading of the will. He asked me specifically to handle this part. The words landed like a thunderclap. Richard's attorney? Elias had never mentioned working with my husband. I felt the ground tilt beneath me. All those years of stolen moments, all the careful lies, and somehow Richard had known? Margaret laughed bitterly. This is ridiculous. Our family lawyers have handled everything for decades. You're nobody. Elias opened the envelope with calm precision. Richard changed his will 6 months ago, after his diagnosis. He made sure it was ironclad. And he left a video message for all of you. He pulled out his phone, tapped a few times, and Richard's face filled the screen. My late husband looked thinner than I remembered, but his eyes still held that sharp intelligence that had built his empire. If you're watching this, Richard said, his voice raspy but clear, then I'm gone. And Beckett is probably standing there taking the heat from all of you. Let me be perfectly clear. Beckett was never a gold digger. He was my partner in every sense that mattered to me. He gave up his gallery dreams, his freedom, his own happiness to stay with me when I got sick. I knew about Elias from the beginning. The crowd gasped. Margaret's mouth opened and closed like a fish. I couldn't breathe. Richard continued. Elias came to me 2 years ago. He told me everything. Instead of anger, I felt relief. Beckett had been carrying the weight of my illness alone while still trying to be the perfect husband. I asked Elias to stay away so Beckett wouldn't have to choose. But I also asked him to be the one to deliver this message because he loves Beckett in a way I never could. The entire estate, every dollar, every property, is Beckett's free and clear. No contest possible. Because he earned it through loyalty and quiet sacrifice. And one more thing, the gallery space I bought in Brooklyn last year, it's already in Beckett's name. He just never knew. The video ended. Silence swallowed the cemetery. Elias put the phone away and looked straight at me. He wanted you to be free, Beckett. Not just financially. He wanted you to stop hiding. Tears burned my eyes. All those nights I had lain awake wondering if I was a terrible person for loving 2 men in different ways. One out of duty, one out of soul-deep need. Richard had known. He had chosen to set me free even as he was dying. Margaret stepped back as if slapped. This can't be real. But Thomas, Richard's brother, who had always been quieter, simply nodded. He was always one step ahead of us. If this is what he wanted, then we honor it. Lena finally met my eyes and gave me the smallest smile, the kind that said she had been waiting for this day too. Elias touched my arm gently, the first contact in months, and the warmth spread through me like sunlight after a long winter. Walk with me, he asked. We left the gravesite together, the bright afternoon sun casting long shadows across the headstones. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was running from anything. We walked in silence for a long time, past rows of polished marble and fresh flowers, until we reached a quiet bench under a sprawling oak tree at the edge of the cemetery. Elias sat first, loosening his tie with one hand. I sat beside him, close enough that our knees touched, and the simple contact felt like coming home after a war. How long did you know Richard? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Since the day you married him, Elias admitted, staring at the horizon where the New York skyline shimmered in the distance. I showed up at the courthouse that morning, ready to stop everything. But when I saw you sign those papers, you looked at peace for the first time since college. So I left. Then 2 years ago, when his health started failing, I reached out. Not to steal you, but to make sure you weren't drowning alone. He laughed softly, the sound full of old pain. Richard invited me to his office. We talked for 3 hours. He told me he had always known you still loved me. He said the cancer gave him clarity. He wanted you to have the life we planned before the world got in the way. I thought about all the times I had canceled plans with Elias because Richard needed me, all the text messages I deleted, all the guilt that had become my constant companion. I hated myself for it, I confessed. For loving you while I was married to him. For staying when I could have left. Elias turned to me, his green eyes steady. That's why Richard chose me to do this. He said you would need someone who understood the weight you carried. He wasn't angry, Beckett. He was grateful. You stayed when most people would have walked away. Back in the city that evening, we ended up at the penthouse I now owned outright. The space felt different without Richard's presence, less like a museum of success and more like an empty stage waiting for a new play. Elias made coffee the way I liked it, strong with just a splash of oat milk, and we sat on the terrace overlooking the lights of Manhattan. Remember the cabin weekend? He asked, smiling. I did. 3 days in the Adirondacks where we had pretended the outside world didn't exist. No phones, no guilt, just us. But the peace didn't last. The next morning my phone exploded with messages. Margaret had posted on social media about questionable circumstances surrounding the will. Old college friends who had drifted away after I married Richard started texting, some supportive, some judgmental. My parents called from Ohio, their voices laced with the same worry I had heard since I was 17. Are you sure this is wise, son? Jumping from one man to another so soon. They still didn't understand that Elias had never been the other man. He had been the first and only real one. Elias stayed through the week, helping me sort through Richard's papers. We found letters I had never seen, notes Richard had written to himself about wanting to give me freedom. One line stuck with me. Beckett deserves the kind of love I had once. I won't be the chain that keeps him from it. The words cracked something open inside me. For years I had told myself I was doing the right thing by staying loyal, by hiding my heart. Now I saw it had been a cage of my own making. One night, after a particularly brutal call from Margaret's lawyer threatening to drag everything into court despite the airtight will, Elias found me on the terrace again. I was crying for the first time since the funeral, not for Richard, but for the years I had lost pretending. Elias pulled me into his arms without a word. His heartbeat was steady against my ear, and for the first time in over a decade, I let myself believe I could have this without shame. The legal battle never materialized. Richard's will was ironclad, and Elias, it turned out, was one of the top estate attorneys in the city. He had quietly made sure every loophole was closed. But the real fight was internal. I started seeing a therapist recommended by Lena, someone who specialized in complicated grief and identity for gay men in their late 20s. Session after session, I unpacked the layers. The conservative upbringing that taught me love was conditional, the fear that if I chose Elias openly my family would pull away again, the guilt that had convinced me I didn't deserve happiness. Elias never pushed. He took a leave from his firm and moved into the guest room at first, giving me space. We cooked together, watched old movies, talked until sunrise. Small things felt revolutionary. Holding hands in public without looking over my shoulder. Kissing him good morning without checking if the curtains were closed. One weekend we drove up to the same cabin in the Adirondacks. This time there were no secrets. We hiked the trails we had once walked in silence, and at the top of a ridge overlooking the mountains Elias turned to me and said, I never stopped waiting, you know. Not for a single day. But old wounds don't heal overnight. I started having nightmares about the funeral, about Margaret's face twisted in hatred, about my parents' disappointed sighs. Elias held me through them, but I could see the toll it took on him too. He had sacrificed his own reputation. Rumors were already circulating in legal circles that he had been involved with a client's husband. One evening, he came home from a meeting with a split lip after an old colleague had called him a homewrecker. I wanted to storm into that office and defend him, but he stopped me. This is my choice, Beckett. Just like staying with Richard was yours. We don't get to rewrite the past, only decide what the future looks like. Meanwhile, I finally visited the gallery space Richard had bought for me. It was a beautiful corner building in Bushwick, all exposed brick and huge windows. The realtor handed me the keys with a knowing smile. Your husband was very specific. He said the first exhibit should be yours, whatever you wanted to show the world. I stood in the empty space and cried again, this time with gratitude. Elias met me there later, and together we sketched out plans. He would help with the legal side, I would curate. For the first time, I felt like my life was mine again. But the past wasn't done with us. My younger brother, Jake, flew in from Ohio unannounced. He had always been the golden child, the straight one with the wife and kids. He cornered me in the kitchen while Elias was out. Mom and Dad are worried sick. They think you're making a mistake jumping into this so fast. And honestly, Beck, I saw the way you looked at Elias at the funeral. You've been lying to all of us for years. The words stung because they were half true. I had lied by omission, protecting everyone but myself. That night Elias and I sat on the terrace again. Maybe they're right, I whispered. Maybe I don't know how to love without hiding. He took my hand. Then we learned together. No more secrets. No more guilt. Just us, figuring it out in the open. His voice cracked just a little, and I realized how much he had carried too. Watching the man he loved marry someone else. Waiting in the shadows, believing he wasn't enough. The opening of the gallery became the turning point none of us saw coming. I titled the exhibit Hidden Light, a collection of my own photographs and paintings from the years I had spent quietly creating while caring for Richard. Each piece told a story I had never been able to voice. Shadows of two figures in a city street, a single hand reaching through darkness, sun breaking through storm clouds. Elias helped hang every frame, his sleeves rolled up, paint smudges on his forearms. Lena brought flowers. Even Thomas showed up, Richard's brother, with a quiet apology and a check for the gallery's first charity auction. Margaret did not. She sent a single email that simply read, "I hope you're happy with what you've taken from us." I stared at it for a long time before deleting it. Some bridges burn, and sometimes that's the only way forward. The night of the opening, the space filled with people, artists, friends from NYU I hadn't seen in years, even a few of Richard's former colleagues who came to pay respects in their own way. Elias stood beside me in a Navy suit, looking every bit the successful attorney, but with a softness in his eyes reserved only for me. When the speeches started, I stepped to the microphone with my heart hammering. This gallery exists because someone believed I deserved a second chance at my dreams, I said, voice steady for the first time in months. Richard gave me that chance, and Elias gave me the courage to accept it. I looked across the room and saw my parents standing near the back. They had driven all the way from Ohio without telling me. My mother's eyes were wet, my father's face unreadable. After the applause died down, they approached slowly. Dad cleared his throat. "We didn't understand, son." "Not really. But seeing you, we want to try." Mom hugged me tight and whispered, "We love you. Both of you." It wasn't perfect. It never would be. But it was a beginning. Later, when the last guests had left and the city lights twinkled outside the windows, Elias and I stood alone in the gallery. He pulled a small velvet box from his pocket. Inside was a simple platinum band. "Not because we need paperwork," he said softly, "but because I want the world to know this time I'm not letting go." I slipped the ring on his finger right there among the paintings that told our story. The months that followed were a blur of healing. We sold the penthouse and bought a brownstone in Brooklyn with a backyard big enough for the dog we adopted on a whim. I ran the gallery full-time. Elias took on fewer cases so he could coach a youth LGBTQ legal clinic on weekends. We argued sometimes, old fears surfacing like ghosts, but we learned to talk instead of hide. One crisp autumn evening we drove back to the cemetery. The grass had grown over Richard's grave, and someone had left fresh flowers. I placed my own bouquet down and spoke the words I had never been able to say while he was alive. "Thank you for setting me free. I hope you found peace too." Elias stood beside me, hand in mine. The sun was setting in a blaze of orange and pink, painting the headstones in warm light. For the first time, the weight I had carried for so many years felt gone. Not forgotten, but transformed into something lighter, gratitude instead of guilt, love instead of shame. Winter came early that year, blanketing New York in soft white. Elias and I spent Christmas with my parents in Ohio, a quiet holiday filled with awkward but genuine conversations and my mother's famous pecan pie. Jake even brought his kids, who called Elias Uncle Eli, without missing a beat. On New Year's Eve, we stood on the Brooklyn Bridge watching fireworks explode over the city, the cold air sharp against our cheeks. Elias pulled me close and kissed me right there in the open, thousands of strangers around us, and nobody cared. That was the moment I realized I had finally stopped hiding. spring brought new beginnings. The gallery hosted its first major show featuring young LGBTQ artists from across the country. Elias proposed officially on the same ridge in the Adirondacks where he had once told me he had never stopped waiting. This time I said yes with no reservations, no secrets. We got married the following summer in a small ceremony at the cabin, surrounded by the people who had chosen to stay: Lena, Thomas, my parents, a handful of friends who had never wavered. No big spectacle, just love out in the open under the bright sky. Looking back now, standing on the terrace of our brownstone watching the sunset paint the skyline gold, I understand the journey wasn't just about losing Richard or finding Elias. It was about finding myself. The boy who had hidden in dorm rooms and quiet cafes had become a man who could stand in the light. The accusations at the funeral, the family fights, the years of guilt, they had all led here, to a life that felt honest and whole. Elias stepped up behind me, wrapping his arms around my waist. "Penny for your thoughts?" he murmured against my ear. I turned in his arms and smiled. Just thinking how lucky I am that the worst day of my life turned out to be the beginning of the best one. He kissed me softly, the kind of kiss that still made my heart race after all these years. And as the city lights began to flicker on around us, I realized the story wasn't over. It was only starting. Was hiding your true love for years ever the right choice if it protected the people you cared about? True or false?